Hey there. Welcome to the Pine Island Experience podcast. I'm Joanna Anderson with my husband, Trygve. Each of our episodes will be conversations with fellow Pine Islanders.
The goal of our podcast is to share with you our experiences, what we have found to be fun, and what makes the Pine Island experience so unique.
Goes, man, let Elsie run the boat. And he had been showing me, we had a little boat, but then when he would run the boat, the appointment boat, and I would go with him, he would let me drive, unbeknownst to Gar Beckstead and John Matz, the service manager. So he said, let Elsie run the boat. And John said, I'll let Elsie run the boat when she can draw every marker between here and Four Winds Marina and how to go around it. So Scott, if you saw him today, he always has a pencil in his ear, the carpenter side, and him stuck in his hat. So he pulled his pencil out, turned my little placemat over and said, show him. And I was just like, oh my gosh, really? So I drew every marker and what way to go around it. And John just shook his head. So about 2 hours later, I, at that time, had become his secretary for the service department. And so he walked into the office and said, let's go. And I said, where are we going? And he said, you're taking me to Four Winds. We're picking up the generator guys. Well, I had a sundress on, and I'm like, really? And I'm in a center console boat that you have to stand up and drive. So I tucked this, my skirt between my knees or my dress and off we went. And from that point on, I started running the boats. Loved it. But I made a lot of people nervous when I pulled up to the dock.
You were listening to Elsie Stearns, a longtime Pine Island resident whose life has been shaped by family, hard work, and an incredible commitment to community. From her early days on Useppa to decades of service on Pine Island, Elsie's story is one of heart, leadership, and love for this island. Here's Elsie. We have Elsie Stearns here today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Been talking to you for quite some time about this interview. We're so excited. Can't wait to get into it. You are currently, one of your many duties on the island is you're currently the vice president of Centennial Bank and senior branch manager.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big title. And then we want to get into all the other things that you've done for the island, all these years that you've been here and your experiences. So welcome.
Great. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks for coming.
Sure.
So we'll start way back when, before you came to the island.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was born in Washington and spent the first 15 years of my life in Maryland. My mom worked for NOAA. My father was in the printing union, and they would often vacation in Daytona. My mother had family there. So at the young age of 46, my dad had his first heart attack. So they decided that they wanted to move south. Everybody wants to end up in Florida, or most people. And so we picked up and we moved to Daytona Beach. And I think it was 1974. I was just 15. I was a cheerleader. I was devastated. I didn't want to go, but my dad promised me a pool. And then when we got to Daytona, he said, why do we need a pool? You are going to be on the beach every day watching surfers. So it's very true. And shortly after that, 6 months later, I actually met my future husband at 15. Felt like the move wasn't quite that bad anymore. And so I went to high school in Daytona. And then my brother, my oldest brother, I have 4 siblings, and my oldest brother was on Useppa working, and he came over for my high school graduation in Daytona and met Scott. And we were actually engaged at the time and talked to Scott about Useppa. And Scott's father was a flooring contractor. He had Stearns Tile and Carpet for 50 years in Daytona. Very cool story there with his history. But so Tony Whitecrow, as he's known, he talked Scott into coming over and doing tile work in the pro shop on Useppa. And so I had to stay behind. My mother was then working for the hotel industry. She was an administrative assistant, and I was working with her, and I had just graduated. So Scott came on over to Useppa. He called me up on the phone and said, you have to come here. There's such a future for us here. We need to be here. I said, "Where are you?" And he said, "I'm on an island. You can only get there by boat." I said, "Where do I park my car?" I had no clue. I was a city girl. I had no clue. And so he said, "Elsie," he said, "you park your car at a marina." And I said, "Well, how do I get around on this island?" And he said, "It's 1.5 miles long by 1/2 mile wide." He said, "You walk, you ride a golf cart, there's work trucks." So in September of 77, I came on over, rode out to Useppa, met Garfield Beckstead, who at the time owned the island. And unfortunately, my brother had left to go to California, and I didn't realize that. So Scott and I just fell in love with the island. My first day there, that's when I met Mel Mayo. So that was September of 77, and quickly became best friends. We just had so much in common. And I think it was kind of comical to her because I was just such a city girl and she was island girl through and through. So I give her credit for making me the island girl. And so we lived on Useppa into the 80s. I got pregnant with our daughter, Darcy, and we decided coming back over to the mainland was not a bad idea. And we actually moved in with Steve and Mel and lived with them initially on Pine Island until we found a place of our own. So, and then we've been on Pine Island since 1980, ever since. So what an experience though. I mean, you rinsed your hair in salt water that came through the pipes out there, and there was no laundry facilities. There was, you had to take your groceries. We lived up top of the pro shop. We were fortunate that Garfield wanted us up there. The other couple that was considering going up there they were a little bit older. He was a plumber. He was in his 80s. And they didn't want to climb the steps. They were quite steep to get up to the pro shop. So here we are on Useppa looking across to Cabbage Key and, just beautiful sunsets. And 2.5 years, there were none of the homes out there, only the original cottages. So it was just an amazing experience. And you look back now and realize how amazing it truly was. I learned how to drive the boats and all that fun stuff. Really, really became. Mel had a horse out there back in the day. They barged it out there actually. So, and then of course, my friendship with Mel continued for many, many, many years. She got pregnant with Nate. 5 months later, I had Darcy. She got pregnant with Anna. 5 months later, I had Derek. And then she had Lukey. And I said, I'll love on Lukey because I'm not doing this again. So yeah, then we moved on over to Pine Island, and I didn't work when we had the kids. I stayed at home with them for a while. And my husband stayed on the outer islands. When they started building homes on Useppa, he worked for a contractor and was there, and then transferred over to North Captiva and worked on North Captiva. And the family that owned Four Winds Marina at the time when Scott and I first went out to Useppa, Jean and Clay Boyer, John Boyer lives here on the island still. And they kind of took Scott and I under their wings. And so they sent Scott to Marine Mechanics School. And Darcy was just a baby. She was just 1. I think they were hoping that we would step in and help run the marina. But I think Scott longed for construction. And so he ended up, on the outer islands again and worked out there for several years. So then we have our son, we have Darcy, we have Derek, just beautiful kids. I worked at Winn-Dixie for a short period of time when I did go back to work part-time. So I would leave them at a neighbor's that was they were like grandparents to the kids. And I would just go for a few hours to Winn-Dixie. I went to work there. When Darcy turned almost 6 and Derek was turning 4, Darcy was ready to go to school and Derek was ready to go to preschool. And I had just been working a little bit at Winn-Dixie again, so I didn't have to leave the kids, just left them a couple days with the neighbors. And just for a few hours, Donna Roach, who anybody that's lived here on the island for a long time, Donna was a branch manager at the bank, which is now the Cambio Advanced Dermatology building. And Donna plucked me from Winn-Dixie and said, "You need to come to work for me." That was in 1985, or late 1985. And I went to work for her, and that's been my banking career. This is my 41st year in banking on Pine Island, if you can believe that. I can't believe that.
Well, little did you know you were going to go into banking.
I know. I had no clue. I had no clue. And I love what I do because my banking career, it's enabled me to be involved in the community And listening to your all's podcast, so many people, we all talk about the community and how much we love it and how we do things for so many people. And banking out here, it's been great because in my career, I've watched families, like the Hunch family go from a small office under their home to the company that they have today. Joel's Plumbing at the time was just, a van and a shovel, and now you see, there are several vans running around, just different. It's been such a joy to just be a part of that and watching those businesses grow and be their local banker. I honestly love what I do. I love making things happen for people. And I've just been blessed my entire career to be able to work for a smaller bank. The CEO that I went to work for, Dick Ackert, they started a bank at what now became Wells Fargo. When I was over at the first bank I went to work for was First National that became CNS. So I was there from 1985 to 1990. And then Donna Roach was the manager, and Dick Ackert, who's well known in Fort Myers, he started the National Bank of Lee County. So he approached Donna to open up what later became the Wells Fargo building there by the industrial park. And so she chose 5 of us to go with her. So it was quite the,
like the upset.
Yes. 6 out of 12 of us left. If you can believe there were 12 people at that bank at the time. I don't think there's 12 people in any bank anymore. But so we left, and Dick Ackert was the CEO. Dave Robbins was the CFO. And so my entire banking career, I worked for them. And Dick was such a mentor, such a wonderful man. And Dave was great. Dave, he was the CFO. He said I collected the beans, he counted the beans. That was my instructions, just to collect the beans. So everyone on the island came to bank with us for the most part, a lot of the locals. And then in 2005, Wachovia acquired South Trust Bank. It had become South Trust. And Wachovia acquired. And small town island girl, just big bank. Our philosophies were not the same. My CEO had retired. The CFO had left. That happens when bigger banks come in and take over. And so I stepped away for a short period of time, worked with Tim Brule, the attorney out here, for just a bit. So missed the banking so much. And I had promised him I was never going to get back into banking. I never thought that I would have the opportunity to do it again. And the CFO, Dave Robbins, approached me after about a year of being with Tim. He came out, and I knew he had started a bank when I left Wachovia, and I was only there 30 days from the time they stepped foot in the bank. And I knew that Dave had started a bank, and he called me up and said, let's go to lunch. And of course, the family said, he's going to want you to go to work for him. I said, no, he's not. We just haven't seen each other. He was going out to fish the O'Bannon at Cabbage Key. We went to lunch, and he just said, let's just cut to the straight. He said, I want you to open a bank for me. And he said, you pick the property, I'll build the bank, were his exact words.
Wow.
And I tell people that story, and I still say my feet haven't touched the ground, because who gets to do that? So I picked the property on Sunset where we are now. I worked with Kyle Kitchen. He's a local architect, loves old Florida architecture. We designed the building together. I said, I want a Thomas Edison front porch. I want a metal roof. I want a marquee. I want it all.
What a great job.
I know. And I picked my staff, and, and I picked, it was all Islanders. It was great. And a couple of the girls that had worked for me for a long time, came over. They got a hold of me that were still working at the Wachovia office, and they really wanted to come. So we made spots for everybody. So that's where I am now. A lot of people ask me, when are you going to retire? And I don't know. I love what I do. And when I walk away, this time I walk away forever, and I know that. So yeah, it's been a wonderful experience, and I love thinking outside of the box. And we know how regulated banking is. It's one of the biggest regulated industries there is, and we know about that. But I like to be able to figure out how to make it work, and to be able to, you walk in and you don't have an account, but you want to cash a check. Let's find somebody that banks here with us that'll endorse the check for you, instead of, sorry, we just don't do that. So, and the philosophy of that is the same with the girls. I work hard to make them want to get up every Monday and come to work, because I know I do. I look forward to Mondays, and I always have. So
I bet they look forward to coming to work.
Yeah, I think they do. We have a great time.
Yeah.
We do. We have a great time at the bank. So
From Useppa to, you pick the property and
yeah, I'll build the bank.
build. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It is pretty cool. And the CFO has passed away, and Mr. Ackert is currently in a memory care facility in Fort Myers. So I pray for him often and keep in close contact with his wife. So, but another fun thing is there's an author that lives out on North Captiva that when Mr. Ackert, when I was a manager at South Trust, he bought the How to Be a CEO book, and he took my business card, my South Trust business card, where I was a vice president, branch manager, laminated it, and then gave me this How to Be a CEO. Because he's, when you show up, if there's trash in the parking lot, like at your home, you're going to pick it up. I'm a stockholder. I think like a stockholder, so I manage the bank well. But he gave me that book, and it's written by Jeffrey Fox, and I've had it in my office forever. And Dick wrote a really beautiful note to me when he gave it to me. And I had a customer in my office, Mr. Lee Highsmith, and he saw the book and he said, Jeff? And I'm like, Jeff who? I thought he was talking to somebody out walking by the window. I said, Jeff who? Because I have it on display in my office. And he said, Jeffrey Fox. And I said, no, I don't know him. And I shared with him the story. And he said, he's my neighbor on North Captiva. He said, well, I walk with him every morning. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So about 3 weeks later, he's written other bestsellers, and he combined the How to Be a CEO with 2 other titles. And a box shows up, and it's from Jeffrey Fox, and it's signed, on the inside. So I have that in my office now too. So it's just funny. I always say that on Pine Island, when I describe the island to people, I always say it's everything from the crusty old fishermen to some of the wealthiest people in the world are here. And so you never know who your neighbor is. And our neighbors are the outer islands as well. We support North Cap, Cabbage, Useppa, all those islands. We're their lifeline and always have been. So there's a huge connection, not just in my banking career with those islands, in our lifetime going out there. So we used to watch, when I was just a young girl on Useppa at 18, I would watch I knew the Wells family, obviously. They came in 76. So we would watch, we'd watch Rob take the school, boat to catch the school bus on Pine Island. And Ken was just a little one. So, but it's very cool to watch that family again, see the great history that they bring to the island as well. There's so much of that here.
I asked Rob when we were out with him, I said, what was it like? Grow up out here. It's an island. It didn't have anything. And, your mom and dad were bringing you here. He said, it was the greatest childhood. He said, I'm driving a boat when I was a young person. Yeah. I'm going to see my friends on another island. He said it was the greatest.
It's very special. It is. When we were on Useppa, Scott did everything. My Scott does anything and everything. He's a master carpenter. He's just, He'll rig your boat. He'll put the motor on. There's nothing that the man can't do, which is pretty incredible in itself. But when we were on Useppa, a lot of that came to him because of that, because we were there when they brought the underground power. We worked with LCEC. Scott helped build the reverse osmosis plant that's out there. He drove the barge. You had appointment boats to run to Four Winds to pick up. You had employees to bring back and forth. And we used to have lunch together every day out there. I used to make 10 o'clock break. I used to make, they called them Elsie McMuffins, homemade Elsie McMuffins. They used to, because the crew would come in because you're on an island. You can't run to Circle K to get something. And so we'd all have lunch together. And when they got the Collier open, Mel would cook up at the Collier. And when she'd cook up there, I'd close the tarpon bar and then go up and help her get lunch for the crew. And one day we were up there, and at the time, I had done everything out there, from steak dinners for boaters to running the tarpon bar to helping Mel up in the kitchen. And she made me, when they did a pre-opening of the Collier, and Mel told me that I had to be a waitress, and I'd never done that before. And, we had stone crabs, I think, and steak were the only 2 things on the menu. And it was kind of like a little pre-opening for Garda. The Collier was now ready to be open. And I tried it for a couple of tables and finally went back in the kitchen and told Mel, look, I'm not doing this. I'll go bartend because I don't want a waitress. You need to find somebody else. So, but one afternoon we were having lunch, all of us at the Collier back in the back kitchen room. And John said, Scott, I need you to run the boat. You need to go pick up the generator guys, because we were running on generators out there. And he said, you need to go pick up the generator guys. And Scott said, he goes, man, let Elsie run the boat. And he had been showing me, we had a little boat, but then when he would run the boat, the appointment boat, and I would go with him, he would let me drive, unbeknownst to Garb Exted and John Matz, the service manager. So he said, let Elsie run the boat. And John said, I'll let Elsie run the boat when she can draw every marker between here and Four Winds Marina and how to go around it. So Scott, if you saw him today, he always has a pencil in his ear, the carpenter side, and him stuck in his hat. So he pulled his pencil out, turned my little placemat over and said, show him. And I was just like, oh my gosh, really? So I drew every marker and what way to go around it. And John just shook his head. So about 2 hours later, I, at that time, had become his secretary for the service department. And so he walked into the office and said, let's go. And I said, where are we going? And he said, you're taking me to Four Winds. We're picking up the generator guys. Well, I had a sundress on, I'm like, no. Really? And I'm in a center console boat that you have to stand up and drive. So I tucked this, my skirt between my knees or my dress and, and off we went. And from that point on, I started running the boats. Loved it. But I made a lot of people nervous when I pulled up to the dock and they saw that it was me. They'd start asking a lot of questions. And, there were no cell phones back then. And so, and of course, we had built that relationship with Gene and Clay Boyer at Four Winds, and they knew I was coming, and then Scott would know when I was coming back. So somebody always knew, because if you did have problems, you're a girl, you're out there on the boat, you're by yourself. And that was a great experience too.
Didn't you say the boat, you were telling me about some of this before, and you said the boat didn't back up. There was no reverse. How did you handle that?
So I was driving a center console Apollo boat. That was the work boat. Well, Garb Exted had a Pinion, which was the drive boat or whatever, drives from underneath. There's not a motor hanging off the back.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Instead of the IO, it goes, shaft goes all the way up.
Yes. So they called to the service department one afternoon, and they had been over at Four Winds loading the barge and realized it was late and no one was out there to run the work crew in. And so they called me in the service department and said, Elsie, John wants you to run the work crew in. And I said, there's no boats out here. And they said, oh yeah, Gar's boat's out there. Take Gar's boat. And I'm like, I'm not driving Gar's boat with the work crew. Are you crazy? I can't tell you the size of the Pinion, but it was not, it was a different boat and I had never driven it. So Scott got on the phone and said, you'll be fine. Just come on in. Just drive it just like you drive the other boat. You'll be fine. So everybody loaded up in the Pinion. There were probably about 10 of us. And we pulled into Four Winds Marina, and at the marina now where the Lazy Flamingo is and all the docks are right there where people pull up to park, that used to be all covered slips. And so it was individual slips. And so when I came off plane and, to pull in there, I looked at Scott because I knew the only way to get people off the boat was to back that boat in there because you had to get off the back of that boat. And I just looked at Scott with my hands up like, okay, now what? And he just pointed to, just his eyes like, watch me. And so I did. And so he was telling me which way to steer it and when to bump it in reverse to get it to back in there. And honest to God, I backed it in like I had driven it my whole life. But I got off the boat and told him and John that they were never to have me drive Garb Exted's boat again. I was so nervous. That was not fun. And so yeah, but it was, little things like that happen that now you look back and realize, oh my gosh,
What an experience.
Steve Long and Scott, Steve was the best man in our wedding, and he and Mel got married shortly before Scott and I did. They got married on the island. We went back to Daytona and got married in Daytona. And so he and Scott would go fishing. And Steve did that when he wasn't working on the island. So, and one night they didn't come back. Well, again, I had only been on the island a few weeks and I was mortified. Where is Scott? I kept telling Mel, where is Scott? They're not back. Oh, they're fine, she said. I'm like, I had no clue that you could walk to Cabbage Key on low tide, except for the channel where you only needed to swim. I didn't realize that the water was that shallow. I didn't know. And So it got dark and darker and later, and Mel came up to the pro shop and stayed with me because I was just panicked that Scott and them were not back. And so it actually ended up being quite comical because the next morning when we got up, I said to Mel, I'm like, obviously I didn't sleep all night. And there was one phone in Gar's house out there. And I said, I'm calling the Coast Guard. I said, I can't believe they're not here. And she said, you can't call the Coast Guard. She said, Steve's boat's not finished. He doesn't have his numbers on it. It's not registered. You can't call the Coast Guard. Oh, so we're walking down the island and I'm like, I have to, Mel. Scott would never leave me out here like this city girl I was. And so here we look, and here comes another commercial fisherman. And one of the guys that was on the boat was Steve and Scott. Not Steve and Scott, but Tony that worked for us out there, another Tony. He's coming back from Part Island, I think it was, that's across from Useppa. He was coming back with one of the commercial fishermen, and he came walking up the beach, and Mel and I went running out there like, where's Steve and Scott? Well, they were right across. They were right there. The motor broke down. Steve dropped the spark plug in the water. It was a cold night they spent on that island, but they were right across from us. I mean, they could have yelled to us. And I had Gar out in the Pinion circling the island, calling Steve and Scott's name. It was quite, it's comical now when you think about it. Because I had no clue. I had no clue so I've learned so much. It's so clear why we live here. You know what I mean? This is a fishing community. It's not a beach community. We don't have the beaches, and we're blessed, in my opinion, for that. But it's a boating community, and it's a beautiful place to live. Some of the people I've met that have traveled the world talk about it's, some of the best fishing in the world is here. It's true.
So in addition to family and the banking career, you've said yes to so many different community organizations. How's that been? And you basically keep saying yes. So.
Yeah. This is true. Well, Donna Roach that I mentioned before, she as a branch manager of the bank, she was a mentor as well. And, she did Habitat for Humanity. She was a fire commissioner. She was very active in the community. And I kind of fell in and followed in those footsteps because in 1998 was asked to be on the fire commission, which I loved it. I felt like I was really serving the community. And then I did it till 2004. And I think for 4 of those years, I was chairman. And I loved doing it. It was, I felt like I was giving back to the community, and it was a great experience. I'm so glad that I did it. It got a little crazy at times. We were trying to build the station in Bokeelia, and the millage hadn't been increased since the inception of the department. So there were some struggles there, but I loved doing it. And I felt like she would have been so proud. She had passed, and she would have been so proud that, and the Habitat for Humanity, the other things you get involved in. And that's the benefit of working for a smaller bank, because they allow you the time to do those things. And then in 2004, when Hurricane Charlie came and they started the Beacon of Hope, they banked with me, started their accounts with me, and they asked me to start balancing the checkbook. So I did. And in 2006, they asked me to be on the board, and I've remained on the board for all these years.
And you're president of the board.
Yes. Yeah. Currently, I've been president off and on, but in some administrative part of it. And, the Beacon they do everything from diapers for newborns to feeding some of the elderliest people on Pine Island and everything in between. So it's a wonderful organization. I was on the Bobby Holloway Memorial Board from the inception. We knew little Bob was very close to Ernestine. And so I was on that board for 22 years. And then it got to be a lot. And Ernestine had some new board members coming in, and, we all know that, boards need to change and good creative minds need to come in. And so I just decided that, I would just stick with the Beacon for the time being. And it really turned out to be a great thing because, since Hurricane Ian, we've started the Greater Pine Island Emergency Task Force now. And I would sit in my office after that storm and talk to Steve Hunch and Glenn Green and, the fire department and the water company. And we had conversations, and it was apparent to me after living out here for 50 years that after Ian, we needed a task force. We know how to get, we know Steve Hunch is going to come out and he's going to push everything out of the way. We know LCEC is going to get out here, but there was no communication with the county as a lot of this was happening after Ian. And our family builds wonderful, strong homes, and we had just finished our house about 6 months before Ian, and on 10 acres in Bokeelia. We lived in St. James for 38 years, but then finally I was blessed to be able to build a Stearns house on 10 acres and in Bokeelia on the ridge. So my husband said, Cat 5, Elsie, I've over-engineered it. We're not going anywhere. So we were here, obviously, after the storm, and everything that could have gone wrong went wrong with this, with the road and all of that. And so shortly after that, we started having all these conversations. And I said to Steve and I said to Glenn Green and those, Glenn is communications. I said, we need a task force. We need a group of people that, for lack of a better term, they're almost like the Navy SEALs of Pine Island that are going to come out and we're going to get the island open. We're not going to come, we're not going to tarp your roofs. We're not going to scrape anything out of your floors, but we're going to make sure that there's communication and that we're getting the things that we need, so that they don't ever come back again and say they're going to evacuate the island. And so we started having meetings in April before Milton came in October. And it's Lee County Electric, it's the water company, it's the fire department, it's Lee County Parks and Rec, it's the Lee County Sheriff, it's, Derek Stearns for construction, Glenn Green for communications. If you go to the website, you can look at the task force and look at the bios. And I brought this team together and we actually met with Kevin Ruane and shared our frustrations of, the lack of communication and how things went. And what our idea was to be able to get the island up and running. We started meeting with what we call the stakeholders, which is the Publix, Winn-Dixie, Ace Hardware, the marinas, to say, we put this team together. We started, we've got contact information. So if the road does get compromised, we can reach out to the manager at Publix or Winn-Dixie and we can get staff out here via boat if we have to. It's a great task force and we have a good plan. And then unbeknownst to us in April, Milton came in October and then, here we are in the same situation. And as a direct result of the task force, LCEC confirmed this. When we found out we're all sitting in our houses and everything's going crazy and, the winds are blowing and some of us have left the island and, and others are still out here. Well, I think it was 2:38 that morning when the waters had started to recede and we knew that, it was coming to an end. When most people's heads were hitting the pillows, our task force had a team task text. And we started getting texts saying from Mark Mallard, Captain Mallard out here, that the roads were not compromised. The fire department was behind them coming back onto the island. And all of the places where the lines were down, because we have LCEC on our team, Trish Lassiter, she's an executive there. She was able to start putting in work orders like immediately. And then the water company got out, McKess, the general manager. And so he's going out with his team and he's surveying and he's sending pictures and where lines are down. And so, by 5:00 in the morning, pretty much LCEC was packed up and ready and got out here. And it was probably that was probably that text and all that went on was a direct result as to why we got our power back. I met that Saturday at the Beacon with the LCEC and the fire chief, and they started talking about Useppa. Well, our family builds homes out there. Derek's a GC for them out there. And so Derek was actually on Useppa, and I heard the LCEC guys talking about getting to Useppa. And of course, that's my home away from home, my second love. And so I said, my son's on Useppa. He's a general contractor. He's out there trying to help and figure out what's going on. And so they connected. They actually ended up knowing each other. And that was at noon. At 3:00, Derek was picking him up at Four Winds Marina, taking the two top guys out there. He had texted them pictures of transformers. When they got out there, Ken Wells was out there meeting with the fire chief, Mark Mascarelli. And he said, here's what's going on Cabbage. We can open, you know what I mean? We can get our restaurant open if we can just get power. So that was at 3:00 after they got out there. Derek was organizing the barging company, Eddie Barnhill's barging company, to be ready to meet LCEC. So again, the next morning, Sunday morning, there they are, loaded up and headed out to Useppa. And by Monday, they had power to Useppa and Cabbage Key. So, I take a lot of pride in what the task force has done. It's an amazing group of people. I just brought the people together because I know the people and I know what they do, and I know their allegiances to the island and their passion for Pine Island and the Outer Islands. And so it's an honor to sit with those people and talk about that. And it's been successful. We've now partnered. We have an islander that is a retired meteorologist, 30 years, Noah, born and raised in Daytona, graduated from the same high school I did when we met. And so he's on our team. He's the latest addition, and he has put us in touch with the National Weather Service, which is now coming down next week. We're actually doing a tabletop exercise for the task force because you want to pay attention to blue sky days too. So, it's fun.
It's too bad there were those 2 hurricanes, but you got to see your task force work. Everything you worked on, it came alive.
Yes. Yeah. And it was, and like I said, our goal is at the task force, our goal is to just be effective for the first couple of days afterwards when everything's safe. And then the other organizations that do so well out here, and the Beacon steps in and has whatever, we had a grant from the Red Cross, which got us a Generac generator after Ian. And so our classroom is kind of like an area operations center, if you will, because we have power, we're up and running. So then the Beacon can step in, and all the volunteers for the Beacon and other board members can step in and do what needs to be done to continue what needs to be done other than, like FEMA applications and those types of things, and connecting with the organizations that the Beacon of Hope, which is the resiliency hub for United Way, have so many contacts. So, and then other organizations out here that step in and do other things will do what they need. They're long-term where we're not. So yeah, it's an honor to sit with those people.
If somebody wants to get involved with the community, much like you have, what advice would you give somebody saying, I'd like to contribute, I don't know how, or, just thinking back over all your experiences, what would you advise?
Well, I mean, the Pine Island Eagle is a great resource for, they do a great job showcasing what the other organizations and what the others do. And I talk to your neighbors and your friends, talk to the locals to find out the local organizations that are, and the local groups out here that are, if you have a passion for fishing and watching kids fish, Bobby Holloway is an amazing organization. And, they put kids on boats that have never been on boats, and they do amazing things for the youth. If that's your passion, if your passion is delivering meals to people, go to the Beacon. If you want to work in the thrift store, there's a variety of things that, and if you only want to be involved after a storm hits, then you know what I mean? You have to know what your passion is, but you can read the newspaper, read the Eagle, reach out, come in and see me. I'll tell you, tell me what you like and tell me what you don't like. And I'll try to point you in the right direction.
You know how to refer them to the right organization.
Yeah. It's really been, being here all this time has been, really amazing. I will share with you when we take friends to the Lazy Flamingo, that was the first house that Scott ever built. So it's very cool that the family got into construction the way that they did and followed, their dad's passion. But that was the first house. He built it for Gene and Clay Boyer. So when you sit at the Lazy, you're actually sitting in the first house that Scott Stearns ever built.
You should make a little plaque and put it in front.
I do know when they moved it, Al Salcelli, who was a Useppa resident, opened the bootlegger there. And when they first moved it over to where it was, because it was on the point, it was a stilt house on the point down there. And he said, man, your husband put it together good because we had a hard time taking it apart to get it over here. So, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun watching. I can't tell you how many times we rode around in the boat when the family started the construction business. And I said, oh my gosh, if we could only see Stearns Custom Builders house on the airstrip at Useppa, and all 3 of them are Stearns homes. And when Derek went to college, Darcy she was an island girl. She was
not a city girl.
No, she was an island girl, and she had no aspirations to go to college. She really wanted to just build a house and live on Pine Island. And, her best friend went up to UCF, and I kept telling her, go up and visit Jesse, make sure. I don't want you to ever come back and say, Mom, you should have pushed me harder. And so she worked for a great group of doctors, and she wore her scrubs, and She was, senior surgery scheduler in Fort Myers at one of the doctor's offices, and she loved it. And she bought her first little house at 20 years old, all on her own, didn't get a dime from her parents. And then Derek, who was racing motocross, that was his passion. And his dad and him traveled around to the races quite often. And he decided, after he dislocated both of his shoulders, which comes with the territory, the better you get, the higher you jump and the harder you fall. But so Derek decided that he wanted to go to college. Actually, UCF was centrally located, and we rented him a storage unit to store his dirt bike because he could get to any track in any short period of time. And then he decided that he wanted to get into construction. He felt like his father had, laid the groundwork and had all the contacts. He and Steve Hunch grew up together, were close. Steve was, stepping into Hunch Industries, and Jake, his best friend, Jake Herring, was gone to UCF with him and was going to get an engineering degree. And Derek just felt like construction was where he wanted to so he wanted to come back. So I can't even tell you how blessed we are that both kids came back. They work together every day, run an amazing company. Scott is pretty much retired. He works on the boats and steps in when he needs to. And then all 5 grandchildren, 4 girls and 1 boy, and they're all here. Only one of them is away at college, and she's up in Lakeland. She's gone to college up there, and her goal is criminal justice. She's been on a mission trip to Ireland. She's gone to Norway. She's gone to Romania. She's going to do her last year study abroad in London and Italy. So she's really blossomed from the island girl and will continue to blossom. So yeah, we're blessed. We're really blessed. And they're all right here. So it's great.
Well, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you wanted to talk about today?
I think we've covered it all, to be honest with you. Yeah. We're just truly all blessed, and keep your faith in your heart and your mind open to the beautiful island we live in. And it's going to change, but it's still beautiful.
Oh, you are certainly amazing.
Thank
we
you.
haven't even listed everything. We haven't talked about everything you've done, but
I'll have to come back.
Yes, you need to come back. Come back with the kids.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah. That would be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our Pine Island Experience podcast. If you have any ideas for us, people to interview, or any comments, please feel free to email them to us at pineislandexperience@gmail.com. That's pineislandexperience, all one word, @gmail.com. Don't forget to like us, and you may subscribe to this podcast using all the major catchers like Apple iTunes, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Thanks again for listening, and remember, island life is a constant vacation. We'll see you on the next podcast.